1885. The pattern of crimes began, which centered specifically on domestic servants. Their private quarters were broken into, rocks were thrown through the windows, threats were shouted, and people were frightened by disturbances. Physical assaults, including attempted rapes, became common, and as the year progressed, the attacks became more violent and, in some cases, deadly.
Oh, God.
Yeah, there was a, like, the beginning of 1885, for some reason, like, people were targeting the domestic
working
workers.
class women.
Yeah, working class women, yes.
And that's what it is, right? It's poor working class women, people who are likely to not have anybody not just looking out for them, but protecting them. People who are not likely to be listened to if they are calling out for justice or even looking for somebody. It's these murderers using classism, using sexism, and using racism in some instances to their advantage. So
Exactly. And by May 1885, disturbances and attacks occurred almost nightly. There was general belief that an organized gang was responsible for these attacks, since such a rampage seemed beyond the capabilities of a solitary culprit. But many theories were put forward, and as the crimes continued without resolution, speculations about the perpetrators and their elusive activities grew more fantastic. The crime scenes were consistent. A bloody axe or implement was often left behind. Sometimes footprints were found, and bloodhounds were used to track the suspects. The victims made earnest accusations. Profiteers contrived to gain rewards. Police arrested several suspects, but responsibility for the crimes could not be proven conclusively. At the time, they arrested 400 men and looking for this criminal, and most of them were African American men.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, most of
them.
them.
And one of the victims was black. One of the victims was a black male. So
yeah, one of the victims was a black male, and five of the women were black.
And it was like that at the time. That was the majority of the victims were these black women.
Yeah.
And so, as much as nobody was checking for poor white women, nobody was checking for poor domestic black women. Oh,
exactly.
Terrible.
Exactly. So, who were the victims? Let's get into the.
Who were they?
Yes. The first victim, Molly Smith, was described as a light-colored mulatto, apparently around 25 years of age. Mm-hmm. She was said to have a high temper and had once spoken of nearly killing a man with a bottle who attacked her. They're not sure when she was born, but they said she was born in Virginia in 1857 and moved to Texas by the early 1870s, if not sooner. So she worked in the Rogers household, which included a wife, 2 daughters, and a son. Robert was a lawyer who was the same age as Molly Smith.
Okay.
That's one of the victims. They also said that she had
She was the first?
Yes, she was the first. They said she had a 10-year-old son named George.
Oh, and she was young.
Yeah.
Well, young in our comparison, I guess at that time, especially if she wasn't married, she'd be an old maid, like 25, right?
Yes. Whatever happened to young George after his mother's death, no one really knows. But she was sleeping in her quarters. Someone broke in and attacked her with an axe. She ended up perishing. So the next one is Eliza Shelley. From the description from the newspapers at the time, a colored woman named Eliza Shelley had 3 small children. The woman was employed by Dr. Lucian B. Johnson as a cook and had been in the service of the family a long time. The woman had no money except for a few paltry cents. She formerly lived in the country where she was in his service. It was an excellent woman, described by the doctor. She had a husband in a penitentiary who she greatly attached. The newspaper, the Austin Daily Statesman, portrayed Eliza in a very positive light, remarking on her good character, temperament, and steadfastness, a faithful wife, mother, and employee.
Now, do you think that has something to do with the status of her boss?
Might be, or it could be the boss giving his memories of Eliza.
Because those are some awful good words for a person that didn't have no money. Husband was in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Was black. Just interesting. I don't know. My mind is racing. Just that time and how black women were objectified, all kinds of ways. I don't know. My mind. It's my mind's racing. But okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Her husband was Ike Shelley. He was a prisoner in Huntsville, Texas. He was released in 1885 after a murder. To take care of the 3 kids. Let's see the next victim. Irene Cross, who was living in the yard of Miss Whitman. The house which she lived in had 2 apartments. In one of them slept a small boy, a nephew of the woman. The other was occupied by her grown son and herself. Irene was born in Mississippi around 1847. By 1870, Irene and her husband, Haywood Cross, were living in Austin along with their 9-year-old son, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
By 1880, Irene Cross was widowed. Her husband had died somewhere in the 1870s. She lived on Chestnut Street, now 18th Street, with her son, Washington, and 8-year-old nephew, Douglas Brown. In 1885, she was living in Linden Street across from Scoots Garden.
Scoots Garden.
Okay. Yeah. Washington and Douglas were living with her. She was murdered there the night of May 23rd, 1885. The night Irene was murdered, Washington was gone, but Douglas was there. He's one of the few people to see the killer, who he describes as a big, chunky, in their words, Negro man, barefoot.
I'm glad they said Negro.
Yeah.
They could have said worse.
Yeah.
I could think of a couple worse things they could have said.
Yeah. With his pants rolled up.
Pants rolled up? What significance does that have?
Is
that a poor person thing?
I don't know, but they said he was barefoot and his pants rolled up. So I guess
that's what I'm saying. That's a social class thing.
Yeah.
That's like calling them country or something. You know, that's you know how they do.
Yeah. She's buried in the same cemetery in Oakwood Cemetery with Molly Smith and Eliza Shelley in the colored section. Of course. Mm-hmm.
There's still, cemeteries still have. I guess it's informal colors. So they don't have a sign anymore, but the segregation is still alive and well.
Exactly. The next victim, Mary Ramey. I guess this is the 11-year-old. Yes, this is the 11-year-old. Mary Ramey.
Yeah, Mary was the 11-year-old.
Yeah, she was born in 1875. She never knew her father, Jacob Ramey. He had died several months before she was born. Mary was raised by her mother, Rebecca Ramey, and grew up in a family which included an older brother and sister, a grandmother, Harriet Cardington, and her uncle, Edward H. Cardington, who had opened the Cardington grocery store on East Pecan Street.
Oh, wow.
6th Street in 1872, which was one of the first African-American owned businesses in Austin.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, the grocery store was also home to the Cardington and Ramsey's family. Downtown merchants often lived on the property from which they conducted their businesses, and the Cardington family did so in the early years of their business. Mm-hmm. Growing up on Pecan Street, experiencing the sights and sounds of a busy but friendly neighborhood, Mary Ramsey would have been known and loved by friends and family and neighbors, including an uncle who ran a blacksmith shop next to the store. She would have been the baby of the family, the center of attention who greeted regular customers and folks from the neighborhood stopped in the store for lunch. Her mother would have told her to stay out of the busy street and to stay away from the streetcar tracks and not to wander into the lumber yard beyond the store and not to fall into the Waller Creek just to the east. By mid-1880s, William Carleton had apparently sold or leased a store on Pecan Street to Richard Dukes and had relocated his business to Mesquite Street, which is now 11th Street, a few blocks north. Rebecca Ramsey found employment working as a domestic servant at the residence of Valentine O'Weed. Wow, that's a name.
Valentine O'Weed? W-E-E-D?
Yes.
Interesting. Interesting.
On East Cedar Street, which is now 4th Street, and she and Mary lived on the property. On the night of August 31st, 1885, an intruder entered Rebecca Ramsey's bedroom, knocked her unconscious, and took Mary into the backyard where, yeah, not going to go into that.
What are you talking about?
He sexually assaulted her and murdered her.
Oh, well, I'm surprised that didn't happen with more of these people, because you know what? I was thinking, I'm like, you mean to tell me somebody just really got off at breaking into people's houses and just killing them? So the sexual assault, I don't find that odd. I mean, you ain't got to go into the detail, but I don't find that part odd, especially for people who target women, no matter who they are.
Yeah, I think the person probably tried, if this is a male, but probably something spooked them and they had to hurry up and get the hell out of there. Either the victim was awake and fighting back, or they heard all the noises from other parts of the house or outside of the home, and they probably had to hurry up and get the hell out of there.
Yeah, and most of these murders, right? They're like 1884, 1885. They're happening, what is that? 20 years after Emancipation Proclamation?
Pretty much, yeah. 20 years afterwards.
And I guess I get that the outrage, the societal outrage, wasn't necessarily there.
Right. I mean,
I get they're serial killers, right? You can't, I mean, it wouldn't be a thing if you could just find them as soon as they did something, but but you know what? I have heard though that, further back, like right after, right after the legal end of slavery, that, Black folks were in positions where they were more regarded socially. It wasn't until post Reconstruction that they got a couple kicks back down. Yeah. So maybe this is still during the period where, they were still treated humanely as the law stated they should be. But
yeah, there were absolute reports of people in the area, even the white people in the area, being definitely afraid. Yeah. And wanted this killer caught, whoever this was. You had officers that was working around the clock on the case, but they couldn't come up with any leads. Why this was happening, what's the MO, anything. So kind of just fell to the wayside, especially towards the end. Another two victims, Grace Vance in Orange, Washington.
Washington.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting.
Orange, Washington was employed by Michael Butler, Alston builder. Orange rented a small cabin on the property of William Dunham at 2408 Guadalupe Street. And Grace Vance lived there with him. They were both murdered on the night of September 28th, 1885. Susan Hancock, this is the first white victim of Annihilator. Susan Hancock was born Susan Clementine Staggs in Alabama in the 1840s. Her husband, Moses H. Hancock, was born in North Carolina in the 1830s, and by 1860 he was living in Boltham, Texas, working as a carpenter. During the Civil War, Moses Hancock served in Howell's Battery and the 11th Texas Field Artillery for Fayette County. So he lost. Susan married Moses Hancock around 1868, and by 1870 the Hancocks were living near Brenham, Texas, and had a daughter, Alina. Moses still worked as a carpenter. Susan's sister, Martha Farwell, and her husband were their neighbors. By 1880, the Hancocks and Farwell families had moved to Waco, where they again were neighbors. The Hancocks also had another daughter by that time, Ida. Sometime between 1880 to 1884, the Hancocks moved to San Antonio without the Farwells. They then moved to Austin by early 1885. Moses likely hoped for carpentry work in Austin, which at that time had experienced a construction and housing boom. They purchased a home on Water Street in the southern part of the city, just north of the Colorado River. On the night of December 24th, 1885, an intruder entered the Hancock